I did my PhD with the Bryden Centre looking at developing a collision risk model for tidal energy devices. So a model that can predict the number of collisions that are likely to happen over the time that device is in the water, and potential collisions with animals like seals. In order to battle against climate change, we need to have renewable energy, and tidal energy is one really fantastic predictable source of renewable energy. We know we can predict the tides out months and months in advance, so there's a fantastic industry there that, especially in the UK, that we can get a lot out of. However, when you're putting in new technologies, we want to try and investigate the environmental impacts of those. That's where my area of research is, looking at the environmental impacts of new technologies that we develop. So it's a balancing act between climate change and trying to look at those environmental impacts of renewable devices. So I've been based down in Portaferry at the Queen's Marine Lab throughout the entirety of my PhD. It's a fantastic location to be for tidal research because you've got a tidal energy site directly on your front doorstep. It means you've got access to data, you've got the animals to study, and you've got the resource to bring in developers and have them working on site. So it is a perfect location for this kind of research. In order to deploy a tidal energy device, you need to address the environmental impacts. That's how you achieve a marine licence, to get permission from the regulatory body that are in charge of putting things in the sea. And so to do that, you've got to study the environmental impacts, and my work fits into that niche of investigating the impacts of collision risk on the populations. For example, Strandford Lock behind me is a protected area for harbour seals. Also, all cetaceans in the UK are protected. You need to legally investigate the potential impacts to those protected species, and that's how the collision risk modelling comes in to do that. I worked quite closely with Marine Scotland Science. They're part of the regulatory body over in Scotland, and they've been involved with a lot of large projects in tidal energy. And so one of my supervisors, Dr. Ross Culloch, was a fantastic help with his in-depth knowledge of the regulatory agencies, the legalities and the policy aspects of my work, and trying to fit my developments of my science into the policy aspects as well. I hadn't worked directly with any developers during the project, but I had conversations with them at conferences, other research groups, folks over in the US, also to try and look at the project on a global scale, looking at what people over in the US are looking for and wider to investigate, how the work I can be doing can be perfectly adaptable to every remit, every statutory body. Through the Bryden Centre, there's a lot of other students working on projects around tidal energy and specifically the environmental impacts. We had people working on drone surveys, people looking at bird surveys, and that kind of ability to go and bounce ideas off other students working in a very similar area meant that it allowed a more collaborative spirit. I also had supervisors from universities, part of the Bryden Centre over in Scotland, and I was able to travel over to Scotland and work closely with those as well to get more advice and more help from multiple sources. The model I developed throughout my PhD has now been published in research papers. We have the methods that I had developed are out there in the public sphere, so this model is now ready for people to take and use in environmental impact assessments. So it's there for the tidal energy industry to take advantage of, to try and improve their ability to get devices in the water and tackle climate change. Previously there were collision risk models that were used a lot in wind energy, trying to look at birds and wind, and they were adapted to tidal energy devices. My work developed a new method of modelling that's been bespoke, set up purely for tidal energy. It can take into account factors like the speed of collisions, the angles of approach that the animal may take towards a device, and it has the flexibility to adapt to the complex scenario that happens under the water with tidal energy devices, allowing us to take advantage of the wealth of data that are out there now from work where people are tagging seals to get more information on how they behave. And we can take that and put that into this model and get a much better picture of what the risk is, because the large factor that's slowing down the development of tidal energy is the uncertainty around collision risk estimates. I use open source software called Blender. It's a 3D modeling software, and what it allows me to do is model the 3D shape of the device, the 3D shape of the animal and their movement, and I repeat over thousands of simulations to get a probability of collision. So that obviously gives you an extremely flexible system because it's Python coded, so I can control every single aspect, and to the point that in the future I see looking at developing individual-based movements of animals, making them move like they were a real seal. And that's somewhere down the line, and a lot more work to be done, but right now it's still in a status that's there to be used by industry. I'm continuing to develop the model itself and to use it in an applied context. Currently I've now started a postdoctoral contract working on a project with a tidal developer, and I'm now using my collision risk model for my PhD in that project to allow us to address licensing issues with the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. From the start of the Bryden Centre, it really put me into a world around renewable energy and environmental impacts of that. There's a lot of collaboration around that subject, allowing me to really delve into an area of research that I really am passionate about. I care about battling climate change, I care about protecting the environment, and so being in the middle of that is a perfect place for me to take my research. It's where I want to go in the future, and so the Bryden Centre was set up perfectly for that. The collaboration with other organisations over in Scotland and then the organisations here in Ireland allowed me to really expand my knowledge base and become really successful throughout that PhD. My current role working on the vertical axis and tidal turbines in Strangford project is we're working directly with a tidal energy developer. I'm working on the marine licensing aspects and the environmental impact studies. So I taken my collision risk modelling forward, using that, like I said, but also I'm developing underwater video cameras that allow us to assess whether animals are approaching this device, whether they're colliding, and trying to gather more information, because at the moment we're currently trying to prove a negative that no animals collide, and so what we need to do is have more time monitoring devices and gathering more data so that we can have more and more knowledge about how animals are behaving around tidal energy devices.